You know, when musicians ask me how to get into music licensing, I always tell them to watch television, film, commercials, trailers, etc. What kind of music is being used? Do any of the music styles you compose sound like they might fit those formats? If so, who's producing those shows? We'll find out and also find a way to get your music into their hands. Hey everybody, John DeFaria here. You know, I've been a musician and guitarist and composer most of my life. I worked in a variety of settings, from performing and touring to doing session work, songwriting, and composing. Today, I'd like to talk to you about my career in music licensing and how I've made over 10,000 music licensing placements in the last 25 years. I had been a touring and a session musician for 15 years prior to getting into music licensing. Like a lot of musicians, the road was great until it wasn't. I eventually knew I wanted to stop, but I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. I was tired of the traveling, tired of being away from my family, tired of the 5 a.m. lobby calls, and tired of having to worry about how I was going to make an income every time one of my gigs ended. Some of my friends at the time were making a living as composers in town. I was doing sessions for them back then, and sometimes they were too busy to write all the cues themselves, so they hired me to write a few here and there for different shows. Well, ultimately they liked what I wrote, and they began giving me more writing opportunities. Over the next 5 years, I learned a lot about the relationship between music and film. I learned what it took to score music to picture in a way that would enhance the storyline. I learned all the technical aspects of what it took to sync music to picture, where music should come in and where it might end in a scene. I also learned how not to over-compose to a scene, how to tread very lightly in certain scenes, and how to be more bold in others. I got better and better at writing music and songs that would sync well to picture. And most importantly, I really enjoyed the work because I was able to be myself musically within the parameters of the gig that I was doing. With my newfound abilities, I began networking and found opportunities and gigs outside of my friend group. I met folks who worked at production companies, music libraries, publishing companies, and commercial agencies. Of course, all of this was a process, and it took a few years' time. But eventually, I was able to start working full-time as a composer and as a songwriter, and the road gigs were a distant memory. I had put together a decent home studio, and I worked there full-time. I was able to be home for my wife and my young kids, and was able to participate fully in family life. Not only was I getting paid a fee for my writing gigs, but the back-end royalties from the placements that I had made were starting to come in as well. I no longer was living hand to mouth. I landed a couple of composing gigs on some movies and television shows, and was also writing songs for various productions as well. There was a fair amount of variety in my work, which I found challenging and exciting. I was continually learning and getting better at marrying music to picture. I'd also like to mention all the amazing music organizations I belong to really helped me transition into the world of music licensing. Organizations like ASCAP, BMI, the Production Music Association, the Guild of Music Supervisors, and the Society of Composers and Lyricists. All these organizations held great learning and networking opportunities that I took full advantage of. More on all of these organizations in a later video. At first, I had to actively pursue clients and opportunities, but eventually I created relationships with a decent range of professionals who liked my work, and they began calling me more and more on a regular basis. I eventually learned that the royalty income I was consistently receiving was the best thing that had ever happened to myself and my family from a financial standpoint. A lot of the music tracks I had in the pipeline would be used over and over again, generating royalty income. There is a bunch of music I wrote in my early years that is still spinning off royalties to this day. When I was strictly a musician, I was living more gig to gig, and the gigs were not very predictable. Even if you still want to tour or work as a musician, music licensing royalties are a great way to bolster that unpredictability. Those royalty checks can show up when you need them the most. So my music career officially began in Miami while I was attending University of Miami Frost School of Music. I also worked with several bands in the South Florida music scene. Eventually, I began working as the guitar player in Gloria Stefan's band, the Miami Sound Machine. There were touring stretches where we were on the road for 3 years, and we had a gas, by the way. At some point, I knew I wanted to get out to LA. My first time out here was actually with Gloria. All my favorite musicians were here in Los Angeles. Larry Carlton, Tom Scott, Vinnie Colaiuta, etc., etc. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I made the move. I was still touring with Gloria, but living in LA. My reputation led to other gigs with new age artist Guitaro and John Anderson of Yes. I also worked and toured with Kenny Loggins for 6 years. When I first got into music licensing, the business was very different than it is today. We were still in the era of hand delivering our music instead of Dropboxing it or uploading it. The internet was just beginning, and it had not near the bandwidth that it has today. There was less opportunity for my music. Network television and movies were available, but cable was only several years old and was actually not paying as well as it is today. Today, TV streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, video games, YouTube, social media all present new and growing opportunities. The other major shift today is the ease and accessibility of working for international production companies in Europe, Asia, and elsewhere. 20 years ago, I was not working for anyone outside of the US. Today, 50% of my work is international. These days, I'm very bullish on the music licensing industry. There are so many more avenues for music placement today than when I first started. I was lucky enough to expand my musical palette and not only work on episodic television, but also commercials, trailers, and promos. Home studio setups have also come a long way since I started out. It is now more accessible and reasonable than ever to create and deliver master quality recordings to your clients. Computer technology has gotten cheaper and way more powerful in the last 10 years. Orchestral sample libraries and drum sample libraries have also gotten more cheap and are much more realistic sounding. There are a plethora of incredible sample libraries that cater specifically to writing compelling and modern sounding tracks for music placement. Recording live instruments and vocals has also gotten so much easier using all the great analog to digital recording devices out there. Just add one between your mic input and your computer, and you're easily transferring your analog signals to a digital format. So this story of mine really did have a happy ending. I didn't have any grand scheme when I started out at music licensing. I knew I enjoyed composing and songwriting, and I wanted to stick around and spend time with my kids rather than spending time in a hotel room touring. So I enjoyed it and got quite good at it. It took some time and commitment, but it really was the best decision I ever made. I think it's an important story to tell, and I think every musician, if so inspired, can have their own journey in music licensing. You could be a singer-songwriter who likes going on the road, but would also like supplementing your income with a few key placements of your original material in shows and movies. You could have a band that does live shows and original records, but maybe you also work for a few music libraries that specialize in placing music in television, commercials, or video games. You could be a hip-hop producer who produces a couple of acts on Spotify, but also produces tracks for the NFL Monday Night Football and is very happy receiving those sync royalty checks. So I guess the question is, what's your journey in music licensing going to be? I know a lot of creative musicians who are doing it, and there's no reason at all why it shouldn't be you. Of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the possible challenges of modern music licensing today. The most obvious being AI or artificial intelligence music composing. The recent good news is that Congress has decided AI-generated music cannot be made copyrightable. That being said, it's hard to ascertain how AI will affect the music industry or all industries for that matter. I am a proud advocate for musician and music creator rights and fairness. I plan on releasing more video content on the subject of music licensing and the subject of how you can protect your rights as a music creator. It's important that you know how the business works so you can sign an agreement with a production company and know you're being treated fairly. Okay, so I hope you've liked what you've heard in this video. Please like and subscribe to be notified when I'll be releasing more videos. And if you have any comments or questions, please add them below. All the best to you and your music licensing journey.